And so speaking out, talking to people, making people understand, I think is one of the ways in which you can really change things.
Yeah. Kay Warner had reviewed Sip by Sip, and she mentioned that at a conference years ago up in Canada, the guest of honor had come to her and said, we've known facts about FASD for decades. It's the stories that change hearts and lives and move the needle. Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, Candid Conversations with Patty Casper, and I'm your host. And joining me today is the esteemed Dr. Claire Coles from University of Emory in Georgia. And Dr. Coles, I've been so excited to meet you for so long. I've had so many of our colleagues recommend that I talk with you, and I'm just so glad you could finally join me in the studio.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So you've been at Emory for a long while.
Many years.
Yeah. What kinds of, and you've always been in the FASD space, correct?
Well, when I started, there was no FASD space. I was originally hired to work at Emory as a postdoctoral fellow when I was just coming out of my graduate training. And the reason was that I had training in working with newborns, and that was sort of a rare event. And the person who turned out to be my mentor, Arthur Fallick, was interested in looking at factors that led to FASD births, although they didn't use the term FASD then. And this was in 1981. And so there was, I think, one other cohort of individuals, and that was Anne Strysko's at this time. And this disorder had just not been well studied. So we began investigating the birth defects essentially associated with prenatal exposure in the population that we had in our inner city hospital here. It's called Grady. But again, at that point, the only thing people were concerned about was FAS, and it was thought at that point to be a very rare event, and there was no expectation of following them over time. It was just, nobody knew anything about it. So we began collecting data. Now, that was 40 years ago.
It seems to me that in terms of the general public, not much has changed. In terms of people still don't know a lot about it, and they still don't seem to be concerned about FASD.
I find, well, yes and no. I mean, there was absolutely no concern when we started. And when we went down to Grady to begin with, which was associated with Emory, in order to begin recruiting people to be in this study, which is what's called a longitudinal cohort study, when you pick people up prenatally and just follow them over time to see what happens. We went down to the OB department there, and we said we'd like to do this, and they said, well, we've never seen this. It's a very rare event, and if you want to waste your time on this, go ahead. So we did, and literally collected a sample for 5 years, recruited people for 5 years, and recruited a great many people, and discovered that it isn't a very common problem in that population, because only about 3% of the women were drinking heavily in pregnancy, but that it was a population of low-income African-American individuals who actually, and many of them religious, and actually that population drinks a great deal less than like the Midwestern population. If we had gone to the upper Midwest, there's a much higher rate of alcohol use. But in any case, nobody knew any of that at that point in time. So,
right. Yeah, upper Midwest is where I am. I'm in North Dakota.
Well, yes, and that particular ethnic group and group of people have a custom of drinking more heavily than they do, for instance, in the South. So you get a different issues, different places.
Right. Right. Now, what are some of the things that how long has this longitudinal study been going on at this point?
Well, the individuals we initially recruited are now in their 40s, early 40s. And we haven't been able to follow all of them, obviously, for a variety of reasons. But we have been able to follow some of them over this period of time and really try to get a picture of what's going on in their life and what's happening to them as a result of this exposure. At the same time, we were collecting people whose mothers were using alcohol in pregnancy. We also collected a similar cohort of individuals from the same hospital, the same population, whose mothers did not use. And those people we've been following as well. And then later on, when they were in their early teens, we collected a group of children from a special education population who were also not exposed, but who had developmental disabilities because we wanted to see if some of the social things we were seeing were the result of alcohol or whether it was common to everyone who had a developmental problem.
Okay.
So we followed all those people up until their 40s. So
Okay. And were there any surprises in your
well,
findings?
at that time, everything was surprising. None of it. What you know now, we did not know then, and what seems common knowledge now. And that's why when you said people don't know, people know a lot more than they did. They didn't know anything. And doctors didn't know anything, and schools didn't know anything, and psychologists didn't know anything. So we know a great deal more than we did, and there's a great deal more attention to pay to this. And literally everything we found was new. So we found that there was a dose-response effect. With the more alcohol, the more effect. We found that there were developmental disabilities. They persisted over time, that they were more significant in certain areas than others, that there was a mental health component, that just a whole host of things, which now everybody sort of goes, oh, well, everybody knows that. But in fact, everybody didn't know it.
Right. Anything that surprises you now as you look back?
I don't know. When we started working with the middle-aged individuals, we had a thought that because of something that's called the developmental origins of health and disease hypothesis, or fetal programming, which when we started, nobody had heard of. So again, as this developed independently through other channels, it became evident that there were things that caused stress during the prenatal period had implications for health. But again, this didn't come out until the late 80s. And that had to do with discoveries made as a result of looking at the population of individuals who had been blockaded in the Netherlands during the Second World War, who endured starvation. And when they followed them up, they found out that the fetuses who were present during the starvation period had all these health problems later on. And that sort of opened up a whole new field of study. Well, so that's going on, and we're going on sort of independently. But about 10, 15 years ago, we started to think, well, certainly alcohol is a stressor, causes low birth weight. We know that low birth weight is associated with long-term health problems. It would be logical to suppose that individuals who were alcohol affected might also fall into this category of people who were stressed prenatally and would have long-term health problems. And there would have been one chapter produced by a number of young adults who were alcohol affected, and they'd done a survey, and it was online, and they had reported a number of health problems. But there was and there were some studies that had been done in Australia, particularly, where they'd identified some health problems, but there was literally nothing else. And I guess in 2016, one of my students published a paper from our clinic data, because we also have a clinic where we see individuals who are alcohol affected, finding that they had effects on blood pressure in childhood. So we thought, well, it would be a good idea to look at the adults and see whether or not they're having any health problems in adulthood. And at that point, nobody else was doing this. Now everybody thinks this is a great idea, and they're starting to do research on it, which I'm delighted about. But anyway, so when we asked the people in the sample, and we decided to do this in collaboration with the University of Washington and colleagues there. And that, of course, was where Anne Streisgood had originally identified her longitudinal cohort, and she had two of them. One was picked up the way ours was, which was prenatal exposure and so on, and the other was individuals who had come to University of Washington for diagnosis. And those who were diagnosed with FASD, who were called either FAS or, in those days, FAE, fetal effects. And we decided to work with that cohort because we wanted to see what happened to people with FAS. So we worked with originally Therese Grant and now Susan Stoner at the University of Washington in collaboration. And we also worked with Joanne Weinberg, who was at the University of British Columbia, and now with Tamara Bodner, who's at the University of Calgary, because Dr. Weinberg is retired. And the study moved to the University of Calgary because they had done a lot of animal studies of this hypothesis. And also they are experts on immunology and some other things that we wanted to examine. So anyway, we had this study, and it was all done under the aegis of CFASD, which is the Collaborative Initiative on Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorders, which is supported by the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. So anyway, all of that allowed us to go back and find the individuals we first identified many years ago and asked, and we got them to fill out a health survey. And they reported to us a great many health problems, and at a much higher level than the people in the control group who were living in the same environment with the same background. And so we can't say it's from social effects. It's from the alcohol effects.
So was this study before or after the ALC's Lay of the Land survey that they published in 2020?
It was, well, we started in 2017, I guess.
Okay.
So I would say that these thoughts were parallel.
Yeah.
And we talked to the adults with FASD about their concerns. So that was, so we worked together on this.
Yeah. And did your research support their findings?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And we also did another study. Brandon Nattell, who is the University of Georgia, published recently a paper in Nature that I'm also an author on, in which he went and looked at a very large database, what's called the Age Cup data, and it is 35 million people or something. And
it's a big sample.
Well, it's a big database.
Yeah.
He identified people who were diagnosed with FAS, and this data set is what's called it's people who have been released from the hospital, and they give the ICD-9 IDC-10 codes, which is what were they diagnosed with. So he identified everybody who had a diagnosis of FAS, and then looked at all their health issues. And what is fascinating is that what he found in that large data set and what we found from the self-report of our people and what they found in the lay of the land are all the same. So we've got three very different ways of collecting information, which reflect the same concerns. At the same time, Olivia Weeks, who's at Harvard and is a biologist, really looked at inpatients in her hospital system with FAS who were having cardiac issues and explored that as well, and also found the same kinds of things that we've been reporting. So you begin to have a number of different parallel, and I tend not to want to take one type of information as, okay, well, this proves anything. You really want to have multiple, and these multiple bits of information are beginning to be convincing that there is really something going on here. Now, we don't understand it all, or why it's happening exactly, but we know that there's an issue here that needs to be examined further.
Yeah, there's so much more work to be done. I have in my first book, Sip by Sip, I have a chapter at the end that's a call to action for FASD research teams, hoping that they will collaborate with some of the research teams for some of these comorbid conditions. Because it really, if we can show that there's some type of causality, which currently we can't, but if
we don't know what it is.
Yeah, if we can get to that point, then just think of what that means on the preventative level.
Absolutely. That's exactly what we need to aim at.
Yeah. Like the two that I focused on in Sip by Sip are near and dear to my heart. I'm very biased, right? One is type 1 diabetes because I've got it, and it's not determined to be causative at this point. However, I believe that at least in my case, it was because of the age of diagnosis, my mother's observations that I couldn't handle sweets, and my never having had any no illnesses, nothing. So I think for my case that it was, does that matter? I don't know. But if you look at the numbers of, FASD is increasing in prevalence, and so is type 1 diabetes. And they're both extremely expensive in terms of lifelong costs. So anything, if we can get that substantiated, think of the savings.
Yeah, and of course reducing the burden on many people who suffer from this, because it affects so many other organ systems and people's lives.
Yeah, the other one that I had chosen to tackle was the ALC's finding of 209 times increased likelihood of early onset dementia, which is, just looking at the face of it, kind of scary. but we can take comfort from the fact we just don't know a whole lot about that. We don't know what type of dementia.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great many. I kind of think maybe it's Lewy. Oh gosh, this echo's driving me crazy. My mom has Lewy body dementia.
Sorry.
And yeah, it's been a long haul.
Mm-hmm.
When she was diagnosed 6 years ago, the neurologist said 6 to 8 months based on the degree of atrophy of her brain, and she's still with us. But the idea of dementia is scary for anybody, but for me with the diabetes, I'm already at increased risk because of for vascular dementia, for Alzheimer's, which they're calling diabetes 3 point type 3, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking Lewy body's characteristics are a lot like FASD characteristics.
Yeah, there are certain, I'm not an expert on Lewy body dementia by any means. There's some genetic component to that, I believe.
Not that I'm aware of.
Sure.
I think officially no, but a lot of people in the support group say, yeah. From living experience perspective.
Mm.
They're saying.
Well, again, there's no information on any of this with FAS. Yeah. We did a test with our adults we are in the process of doing a test that is designed to identify early cognitive decline, which is in theory a precursor to Alzheimer's. And as you also probably know, Alzheimer's is not a single thing, and it's one of those things that people get called it and without anybody understanding what exactly that means.
Right.
So this is pretty complex in terms of. The other thing is there may be some, among those who have been affected by prenatal exposure, there may be effects cognitively that are similar to those that you see in early cognitive decline, which are not the same thing.
Right.
So I mean, that's all pretty complicated to
Two things can look alike but not be the same creature. Yeah.
Or maybe that's what later gets called Alzheimer's. We honestly don't know that hasn't been followed through. My colleague, Dr. Cable, did a sub-study with the cohort we're working with, and she looked at insulin and its relationship. And we found it was too small a sample to say anything definitive. We did publish a paper about it and did find some unusual ways in which insulin was interacting with these individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is, but it was interesting because low insulin was associated with cognitive impairment. So, and then we also looked in relation to weight. Mm-hmm. So if you're interested, you might look that paper up.
I would be, if you can get me the details on that.
I'll send it along.
I would love to read that. So you recently presented at Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Aging and FASD is such a hot topic. They did a whole day on it, and I'm so disappointed I wasn't able to get to the conference.
It's really an excellent conference this year.
Yeah. I was supposed to, you know who Jody Culp is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she and I were going to co-present a topic. Our abstract had been accepted, but neither one of us can travel right now. With my mom, I really can't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's hard being a caregiver.
It is. We had both been looking forward to it, but things are what they are. And, at some other point we can share some of the things we've been working on. But what were the things that you shared with everybody who was able to get to the conference? And I'm keen to ask this because so many people want to go, but can't travel.
Can't travel, or it's very expensive, or all of it. And we had many fewer people at the conference this year because of the people were not wanting to come from overseas and things of that sort, which is really a tragedy, particularly considering how involved, for instance, Australia and Canada have been in all this. The first day, the pre-conference was about sleep, the first half, and then aging. The organizer asked me to look the issue of sleep within the sample, the questionnaire that we had done with the health questionnaire, because we'd ask about sleep. So I really did that, looked at whether or not sleep was affected. The whole meeting was excellent, and the whole discussion of sleep, they had some very good speakers in, and just to talk about the issue of sleep in general. And one of the things you really need to understand with this is that sleep is a huge problem for everybody. When we looked at our control group versus the alcohol group, the control group wasn't sleeping. 50% of the control group were saying they were not sleeping well. And so sleep per se is not reported to be that much of an issue for this group of people we're following. They did report if they were also experiencing depression, that they had sleep problems. But as you probably know, sleep issues are a characteristic of depression. So it seemed more that depression was driving the sleep issues that people were experiencing. So that was what we found there. And again, I believe that they have recordings of these, and anybody who's interested probably can listen to the recordings of the meeting, because it was an excellent meeting. Check with the people who organized the meeting and see if those are available. And then the next day, we presented an overview of our research from what we call the multi-site study, which is the Seattle and Calgary and Atlanta. And several different people presented information from different parts of it. So, for instance, I presented the neurocognitive data that I just mentioned to you and how that was playing out, what that looked like. And let me see who else presented. Dr. Cable presented information about the vascularization, that we are doing what's called a nail fold study. We have a microscope. We can look through people's fingernails and look at the quality of their vascularization. Okay. And that is altered in individuals who are alcohol affected. And we think that's altered all over their body and probably within the brain, and that affects circulation and a number of other things. Yeah. And there are a lot of implications of that. So she presented that data. And then Dr. Bodner presented information about immunology, function, and also some other things related to what is called neurodegeneration and so on. There are markers of such things. So she talked about that. And then Amanda Meneke from Texas A&M talked about a number of other things we're doing as part of our research. We're drawing a lot of samples, and some of them are going to Calgary for analysis, some are going to Raj Miranda's lab in University of Texas, and Amanda is a colleague of his. So she reported on some of the information that we have found as that, and they're looking at things like microRNA, which is fascinating, but not my field of study. Yeah. And then we had also done a study. As part of what we're doing, where we have a group of people who meet criteria for fetal alcohol syndrome, a group who are alcohol exposed, a control group who are the same age, and then we have an older group of individuals who have a mean age of 72, and they are representing normal aging. Mm-hmm. So one of our questions for the study was whether or not what we were seeing in individuals who are alcohol exposed was going to be similar to those who are older. So if there's like premature aging in the population, because some of the diseases that we're seeing are usually characteristic of older people, and not people who are 40. So we have an older group of people as well. So there's something called epigenetic clocks. Mm-hmm. And we ran several epigenetic clocks on some of our samples from Atlanta, looking to see whether we were going to get a pattern in their alcohol exposed that looked like the older adults. Not really, as it turns out.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I remember talking with a dear friend and colleague, Carl Young, who's mentioned several times on air. So I feel like I can go ahead and say this. When he was diagnosed, his physician said, "You are aging prematurely. Mm-hmm. You don't have a 54-year-old body. Right. You have a significantly older body." And as I was starting to develop my chapter for my current project, I got to thinking about my own experience. We talk about the developmental differences, right? Asynchronous development, and how for the first 30 some years, our social and emotional development is lagging behind our physical development. And the 30s and 40s are golden compared to non-alcohol exposed people. Those golden years are older, but then starting in our 50s, our bodies become ankle weights, dragging us down. When our minds are finally we've arrived and our bodies are like,
Oh, I'm sure that happens to a lot of people,
yeah,
or different parts of you quit working.
yeah. But I have my mind's eye watching me move through my own home thinking, I don't walk like a 62-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
I walk like I'm 70 something.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that sad.
It is. And, it's for that reason that a number of people are looking at things to do with immunology and arthritis and so on to see if that is.
Mm-hmm.
And there are several people at New Mexico, for instance, who have developing models for arthritis and related to alcohol. And the last time I talked to them, they had a very interesting animal model, but I think that might be an area that's going to show some in the near future. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, yes, that might very well be affecting
Mm-hmm.
your mobility and so on.
Yeah. Well, I've been battling arthritis since I was in my mid-20s.
Yeah. So, and that's why we were interested in the immune system. And Dr. Bodner is doing analyses on that, which have been a little held up because of various factors going on with the administration of NIH and so on. But we're hoping that will be resolved soon.
Yeah, hopefully. I can add it to my prayer list.
That would be probably a big help.
So one area that needs, I think, a lot more study that we cannot ethically come up with experiments is the whole issue of paternal alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
The epigenetic changes to sperm. I remember Susan Rich telling me, again on air, that up to 75% of what we think of as FASD characteristics can be traced through preliminary animal studies as having relation to paternal epigenetic changes to the sperm. If we can't experiment to verify that, how can we further explore this topic? Because it's important.
It is. And I'm trying to recall, it might have been at the meeting I think it was in Seattle. There was a whole section on paternal effects. And it was very interesting. And obviously, we're talking about epigenetic effects and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be increasingly important in trying to understand these things. I don't know that I would say that 70%, 75% of the effects are caused by that. I think that is probably not accurate, but because there's a whole lot of them that are caused by not epigenetic effects, but mutagenic effects.
Yeah.
But mutagenic is epigenetic, but caused by teratogenic effects of the exposure. And we know that. And the way animal models are going to have to be the way in which this is done experimentally. And you can do a lot with that in terms of things like birth weight and dysmorphology and et cetera, and to try to tease that out. And they're certainly doing that. Where you get into problems clearly is some of the more subtle behavioral things. And it is naive for us to suppose that there's a direct connection between prenatal exposure and a specific behavioral outcome, because there's so many other factors that enter into people's lives that it just isn't the case that this directly causes that all the time. That doesn't mean it doesn't participate in it or doesn't make people vulnerable to it, which I think it does. But if you think about prevention, obviously we would like to prevent prenatal exposures. That's been a hard nut to crack.
And it will be, because our society has a love affair with big alcohol. It
does, and then many societies do, and it's just hard.
Yeah.
And I don't think people continue not to plan pregnancies. So, if 50% of pregnancies are not planned, you're going to, and many, not to be vulgar, but many pregnancies occur because of substance use and lack of thoughtfulness at the time.
Right.
So it's going to happen. But in terms of
one of the reasons, Clara, I'm excited about if we can establish that, there's a fair chunk of the issues going on because of the epigenetic changes with the sperm, then maybe as a society, we can stop blaming the moms and just say, it's the alcohol, no matter who's using it. It's not a good idea. It's just the booze. It's not a good idea if you're of childbearing age.
Yeah, well, that would be a good idea. I think the other thing we can do, though, is think about thinking of people, and there's a huge, I mean, you have people who are very affected, who have dysmorphic features, who really have cognitive deficits, who are the most extreme of the affected. There's a lot of people who are not and who are made more vulnerable. And with that group, we really need to think very strongly about how do we prevent an accumulation of risk factors, accumulation of stressors in order to avoid some of these other things. And we could do that. I mean, we could do that with a lot better than we are. Because we're not identifying because of the stigma and because people don't like to ask the questions about it.
Yeah.
A lot of children are not followed the way they should be in terms of this person is at risk for these health issues, or this person is at risk for emotional issues, et cetera. And we should be doing that better.
And one of the things that I frequently talk about, and it's, there's some ethical questions we'd have to talk about and iron out, but I personally would be in favor of universal cord tissue testing.
The problem you have there is the cost and the insurance companies. And that is, I mean, those things are blocking a lot of the things we think would be a good idea.
Yeah. I see it as a way of, the purpose would not be punitive. Because, unplanned pregnancies and how many women have continued to cycle in early months, there's not fault there, but the purpose would be early intervention.
You're not going to pick up everybody who needs it, though, because, alcohol does not last in the blood very long. You could do, I don't know if you're familiar with the heel stick study they did in Texas, looking at markers for alcohol exposure. Mm-hmm. It was a very interesting study. They did the blood spots like they do for metabolic diseases and found that quite a lot of people came up with positive blood spots, much higher than verbally reported that they've been using alcohol. Mm-hmm. I would like to see them using the blood spots when they're taking the blood spots for the metabolic screens. Mm-hmm. Which they do for most places do for babies. And so that would be able to pick up anybody who's been recently exposed. And that's what the problem is, because if they were exposed, for instance, during the first trimester, neither the cord blood nor the blood spots are going to pick that up.
So that's why I was suggesting the tissue itself as opposed to the blood. But from what I read when I was researching for SIP by SIP, the longest that they've found is 20 weeks post alcohol passing through. Because there's no mechanism in the cord to metabolize it. Mm-hmm. Well, if there's no mechanism in the cord, there's none in the baby either. ADH doesn't come on board till the end of, or the middle to late in the 8th month.
Yeah, well, the whole system isn't really working yet. So.
Yeah.
But there's Julie Cable and Ken Jones published a paper a couple of years ago reviewing
teeth.
Reviewing all of the biological tests for alcohol, and it's quite instructive in terms of most of them don't work.
Yeah, I saw one. I asked him because he's come on the show twice, and between his guest appearances, I had read his study on testing baby teeth.
Oh yes, that's great.
And I had such an emotional when I read this, like, why aren't pediatric dentists routinely? And, then it was like, cool your jets, Patty. It was a small study. Needs verification. Needs to be repeated.
It's a wonderful way of looking at it, because I was just reading something in relation to, well, they've certainly found it with lead, and I think they're doing it with fluoride and some other things of that sort. But they're definitely, you can pick it up in the baby teeth. Of course, by that time, the child's 5. And good to know, but you want to know when they're born, not when they're 5.
Right.
And so how do we pick that up? I said to the CDC, and of course they're in disarray at this point, but that we really need to do this blood spot thing, because you could pick out a lot more. You can't get everybody. And those, if it was just the first trimester, for instance, you might miss people. So you have to use all these different methods: self-report, biological samples, etc. Mm-hmm. And we really don't. That's why we're looking at the microRNA and all these other things, trying to find something that is really going to tell us the answer, but nobody has found it as yet.
Claire, what is your hope for where the field moves next? What do you want us next to be able to answer? or solve?
Well, we have to continue on with everything we're doing. We certainly need to continue with prevention efforts and try to overcome the barriers that keep people from identifying those at risk. I would like to see this health issue explored more fully so that we can get some of the basis of why is this happening, what's going on, what do we do about it. But also because I'd like to see protocols in place with physicians, pediatricians, and family medicine and so on. If you have a person who has exposure, you should be checking for these things early. You shouldn't wait. Many of the individuals we work with are poor, and we're talking living in the inner city in Atlanta. In Georgia, you can't get Medicaid after 21, so they don't have any insurance coverage. So they tend not to go to the doctor, of course. I just can't afford it. And when we brought them in and they answered the questions about their health, we also did blood pressure and drew bloods. And we found a number of people who had conditions that they were unaware of because they didn't have access to health care. And that's outrageous and wrong. And they didn't know to be concerned about it. And when they didn't encounter a physician, they didn't know to ask. And so it's just this ignorance that is incredibly dangerous to people. And you may have someone who is a middle-class person who knows, has opportunities, working as a job, get health care. But for a lot of people, and the people who have disabilities often find themselves in this situation where they don't have adequate, in this country particularly, health care.
Yeah.
And nobody's watching these things or checking them regularly.
Yeah, I remember working in a long time in child welfare, doing adoption home studies. Getting a physical and lab work is part of that process. And so many people that I've worked with through the years are all of a sudden, my gosh, I have cholesterol issues. I have blood pressure issues. I have this, that, or the other that they had not been aware of.
Right.
And it is a big issue.
So, but I think there needs to be a protocol. Okay, and we've identified this person as having alcohol exposure. They don't show facial features, but when they go to the physician, they should say, okay, well, we should check for this, this, and this. Because they have a higher risk for this.
Right.
And we should begin care earlier if they do.
Right. When I moved to North Dakota a year and a half ago, and of course that means replacing my entire medical team. And I type 1 diabetes for over 60 years. I've got a lot of docs, and every single one I give a copy of Sip by Sip to, so that they can familiarize themselves about, what does this look like in adults?
Right. And nobody.
Because that's not taught in medical school.
Well, it's not even known. So it can't be taught. But it should be looked at in children as well. And are these children actually showing higher blood pressure earlier? Maybe. If so, that's important. It has an effect. So that is one thing I think is a growing area of growth. And we need to start to try to identify the specific problems. Like Olivia Weeks has been looking at cardiac stuff, and there's been a lot of attention to that. But again, one person, We also found, and we found in Brandon Attell's study too, a lot of gastrointestinal problems. Lots of them. That's the second thing that came up. And that has a huge effect on people too.
Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? The central nervous system and the GI system are the first two things that come on board. So they would take the biggest hit. They
may, it could be that. For whatever reason, these people are having problems with all that. They're also reporting having problems with thyroid. In our sample, the probability of having cancer by the time you're 35 was 5 times higher in this group.
I was 52.
Well, this is not good.
Yeah.
And again, and these women were like having breast cancer and so on, and they're very young. So it's distressing for me to see that and have nobody know anything about why it's going on. So I would like to see more research devoted to that, which means a collaboration between people who understand FAS and people who understand GI problems. I can't tell you why GI problems would occur because I'm not a specialist in that area.
Yeah.
But we need people who are to become interested in this, which means there needs to be funding. We can be interested in it, but we can't really understand it without the resources to do it. And that's going to have to come from the federal government, I'm sure. So that I'd like to see happen. The other thing I really would like to see, and this has been a real problem, is interventions. And I've spent most of my life working with children and who need interventions, and they don't really exist, or they exist very rarely. And it's very hard for people to get access to them. And I would love to see more work in that. The way in which NIH is structured right now, it's hard to get sufficient funding to do intervention studies the way they need to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a real major issue, because you want, most of the time, for instance, schools and other insurance companies will not accept interventions unless they have a clinical trial behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Clinical trial is a big deal. It's hard to run.
Yeah.
So that area really needs to be expanded and done well.
But and that's also the bias toward quantitative analysis over qualitative.
Yeah, it is. But I think the qualitative I believe very strongly in, because I think it is a way of identifying the problems and developing hypotheses. But you really need the quantitative after that to validate,
to back it up.
To back it up. And one type of research is not better than another. They serve different purposes.
Right.
And so
they can partner well together if people think to do that.
Well, I think that often they do. It's just, for instance, qualitatively, we observe things, and then it's very difficult to get any other funding to investigate it, for instance. Have tried to do this repeatedly.
Yeah. Well, I, for one, being in this population, appreciate your tenacity in trying to get us all answers. So.
Well, I've considered it to be a wonderful opportunity for myself. It's been fascinating. I have really loved the people that I've worked with. And it's just been a wonderful way to spend my career, basically.
I sense that. I can hear it in your voice whenever you talk about different colleagues.
Oh, yes. Well, it's a wonderful field. I mean, none of us are becoming famous or rich, but it has been the people who got into it or get into it and have worked on it are very dedicated people who really have a passion for what they're doing and really care about the people they're working with. And it's a gift, I think, to be able to be working in such a situation.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate the gift of your time today, Claire. I'm so grateful that you could find the time to come on Living with FASD. Are there any other parting thoughts or things that you wish more people knew or understood, or speaking to the audience of adults living with FASD?
Well, I think we need to keep courage on this. As I said at the beginning, I think when I started this, nobody knew anything much at all. And we think now that people don't pay attention or don't understand, but they pay a lot more attention. They understand a lot better than they did. And we have moved the needle. You have to keep working at things. And if you're an adult and you can do it, you need to speak up for yourself and make your needs known, because it's to families. I've talked to politicians about this. I'm trying, and actually the Georgia legislature has been excellent in supporting us over the years. I don't know why, but they have. And one of the things that I think speaks to people like that, to people in power who are inundated with demands and requests and so on, I think that the people themselves who are affected, the families and the individuals who have the disorder, speak louder than anybody else. And so speaking out, talking to people, making people understand, I think is one of the ways in which you can really change things.
Yeah. Kay Warner had reviewed Sip by Sip, and she mentioned that at a conference years ago up in Canada, the guest of honor had come to her and said, we've known facts about FASD for decades. It's the stories that change hearts and lives and move the needle.
Right.
And you just dovetailed right into that.
Well, I think we need to be a partnership. Because we're working for knowledge, we're working but ultimately to help people and to make their lives better. And so we're better off working as a team on this.
Well, I am so grateful for the time that you spent with me today.
Well, I'm glad I could do that.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much.
Well, I appreciate you, and I think what you're doing is very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Living with FASD. Hopefully, this episode added to the breadth and depth of your knowledge about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, and I hope that it also made you laugh along the way. Please email me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com if there are any comments you want to make, questions that you want to ask, topics you want me to cover, or people that you think would make a great guest for the show. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share the podcast. By helping my podcast grow, you will be doing your part to help raise awareness and understanding about FASD, which is something we surely can agree needs to happen. I also wanted to remind you to look in the show notes if you would like to order a copy of my book, Sip by Sip, Candid Conversations with Adults Living with FASD. You can find the ordering link in the show notes, and it is now also available in large print. If you find, like me, find that words tend to swim on the page if the font is too small. Also in the show notes, you will find a Calendly link, which is my e-calendar. If you want to reach out to me and talk about any coaching needs that you might have for you or someone in your family, or if you want to talk about training, if you want me to bring me into your community organization or the company that you work for, I'm happy to do trainings about FASD as well. So those things are available to you. And this time, as always, if there are links or books or whatever else that my guest has brought to the show, you'll find those links in the show notes as well. Anyway, that's a wrap for today. I hope that you have a good week, and we will see you next time on Living with FASD.